I have full confidence in Catherine and William. Their judgment is sound, their loyalty unquestionable.
At first, the report sounded almost impossible. King Charles III signing a decree that could quietly reshape the future of the monarchy. But what made royal observers stop was not only the idea of a signature. It was the timing, the silence around it, and the question it immediately raised. Was this simply planning, or a deeper shift inside the crown? For any monarchy, a signed instruction is never just paper. It carries weight because it suggests that a private concern has moved into official thinking. And when that concern involves the future of the British royal family, every detail begins to matter. Reports suggest that King Charles III has been looking closely at how the monarchy should function in the years ahead, not only as a family, but as an institution under pressure from public expectation, generational change, and the unresolved tensions that have followed the royal household for years. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed the full details of any such decree, and that is important. In royal stories, silence often creates more questions than answers. When the palace says little, people begin to study what is not being said. They look at who appears more often. They notice who stands closer to the monarch. They examine which names are being connected to duty and which names seem to be drifting further from the center of royal life. And in this case, the central question is not only whether a document exists. It is what such a document would mean if the reports are accurate, because the monarchy is no longer facing the world Charles inherited as a young prince. It is facing a different public, a different media landscape, and a far more impatient audience. The older language of tradition still matters, especially to those who see the crown as a symbol of continuity. But tradition alone cannot answer every modern problem. The monarchy must now explain itself without appearing desperate, modernize without looking unstable, and protect its dignity while living under constant public examination. That is why even the suggestion of a royal decree has stirred such attention. At the center of the story is King Charles III, a monarch who spent most of his life preparing for the throne, only to inherit it at a time of deep emotional and institutional challenge. His role has always been complicated. He is not only a father, husband, and grandfather. He is the sovereign, the person expected to place the crown above personal comfort when the institution demands it. That is where this reported development becomes sensitive. If the king has indeed signed instructions concerning the future shape of the monarchy, then this is not simply a family arrangement. It is a statement about trust. And trust is the word that keeps returning to this story. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, stands in a position unlike anyone else. He is not merely a senior royal carrying out duties on behalf of his father. He is the future king, the person the public already watches as the next chapter of the monarchy. Every appearance he makes with Catherine, Princess of Wales, is now read through that lens. Their composure, their family image, their public service, and their careful handling of pressure have become part of the wider royal argument. Some royal commentators believe that any future decree would naturally strengthen the role of William and Catherine because the monarchy's long-term stability depends on a visible, trusted, and disciplined center. But was this reported move really about preparing William, or was it about drawing a firmer line around everyone else? That is where Queen Camilla enters the story in a more delicate way. Her public position beside King Charles III is established, and her journey into royal acceptance has been one of the most controversial and carefully managed in modern royal history. For many supporters, she represents loyalty, endurance, and a steady presence beside the king. For others, her role still carries the shadow of older wounds. That history makes any reported rearrangement inside the royal household emotionally charged. If Charles is thinking about the future monarchy beyond his reign, where does that leave Camilla's influence? Does it remain symbolic, personal, and supportive, or does it become part of a larger institutional question? The palace has not provided the kind of answer that closes speculation. And because of that, royal watchers are left to interpret gestures, schedules, and tones. Then there is Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. Their names still create one of the strongest emotional reactions in royal commentary. Supporters see them as figures who stepped away from a difficult environment and tried to build a different life. Critics see their departure in public remarks as a challenge to the monarchy's trust and discipline. But either way, their relationship with the crown remains one of the unresolved threads of the modern royal story. If a decree about the future of the monarchy has been signed, many viewers will immediately ask whether it includes any path back for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, or whether the door has quietly narrowed even further. That question matters because the monarchy has always struggled with the difference between family and function. A person may remain part of the family by blood, marriage, or history, but that does not automatically mean they remain part of the working royal structure. This distinction may sound cold, but it sits at the heart of constitutional monarchy. The crown cannot operate purely on emotion. It has to operate through duty, visibility, discipline, and public trust. And when those values appear to conflict with family loyalty, the result is never simple. This is why the reported decree has shocked so many observers. It suggests, at least in interpretation, that King Charles may be moving from hope to structure. Hope leaves doors open. Structure decides who stands where. Hope allows unresolved issues to remain quiet for another day. Structure forces the monarchy to define its future before the public defines it for them. And that brings Catherine into sharper focus. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has become one of the most important public figures in the royal family, not because she speaks loudly, but because she represents steadiness. Her image is tied to family, restraint, duty, and continuity. For many royal supporters, she is not only William's wife. She is the future queen in waiting, a figure whose presence reassures people that the monarchy can pass into a new era without losing its emotional center. If this reported decree places greater emphasis on the Wales family, then Catherine's role becomes more than supportive. It becomes symbolic of the monarchy's next promise to the public. But with that promise comes pressure. Public affection can turn into expectation very quickly. Every step William and Catherine take would be measured not only as a royal engagement, but as preparation for reign. Every silence would be interpreted. Every family moment would be examined. Every absence would raise questions. And if the king has chosen to clarify the monarchy's future now, it may be because he understands that uncertainty itself has become a risk. Still, one mystery remains. Why now? Why would such a move be discussed at this moment? When King Charles III is still reigning, Queen Camilla is still beside him, Prince William is already carrying significant responsibility, and the public is still watching the family recover from years of tension. Was this reported decree prompted by long-term planning, private concern, public pressure, or something inside the royal household that has not yet been fully understood? That is a part of a story that makes this more than a headline. It is not simply about a signature. It is about whether the monarchy is quietly entering a new phase, one where roles are being sharpened, loyalties are being tested, and the future is being protected before the next crisis arrives. And once that question appeared, the story moved into far more sensitive territory, because the real shock was not that King Charles may have signed something, but who could gain power, who could lose influence, and what the crown may be preparing for behind palace walls. And that is where the reported decree begins to feel less like a single royal instruction, and more like a warning sign about the monarchy's next phase. Because if King Charles has moved, or is being reported to have moved, toward a clearer future structure, then the question is not only who is named on paper. The question is why the old arrangement no longer seems strong enough to leave untouched. For years, the royal household has managed tension through careful distance. A balcony appearance here, a joint statement there, a public smile at the right moment, and silence whenever the questions became too sharp. That method has often protected the crown from immediate drama, but it has also allowed deeper uncertainty to remain unresolved. Who carries the monarchy's public trust? Who represents the future? Who remains family but not function? And who, quietly, is no longer central to the institution's long-term survival? Those are not small questions. They reach into the heart of what a modern monarchy is supposed to be. The British royal family is not only a family known around the world. It is a public institution built on ceremony, continuity, and belief. People do not simply watch it for titles and jewels. They watch it because it represents something older than politics and more emotional than administration. It offers a sense of national memory, a link between generations, and for many loyal viewers, a feeling that some traditions can still endure even when the world changes around them. But that endurance depends on clarity. And according to some royal commentators, clarity is exactly what King Charles may now be trying to protect. The first group affected by any reported future structure would naturally be the Wales family. William and Catherine already occupy the most watched position in royal life beneath the king and queen. Their children represent the visible line of succession, their public duties are tied to the monarchy's future image, and their every appearance now carries more meaning than a normal engagement. A school visit, a memorial service, a Christmas walk, a diplomatic reception, all of it is interpreted as preparation for the next reign. That is why any suggestion of a decree connected to the future of the monarchy immediately places William under a brighter light. The Prince of Wales is no longer viewed only as the heir waiting his turn. He is increasingly seen as the figure around whom the next royal chapter is already forming. Yet this creates a delicate problem. The more power appears to move toward him, the more the public begins to ask whether the transition is happening quietly before the official moment arrives. And that is where Catherine's position becomes especially important. Her role has never depended on volume. It has depended on steadiness. She has built her image through restraint, family symbolism, early years' work, and a careful public presence that rarely appears rushed or reckless. For many supporters, she offers the kind of calm continuity the monarchy needs after years of public strain. But if reports about a stronger future framework are accurate, then Catherine is not simply being admired as a popular royal. She is being read as part of the monarchy's security. That interpretation matters because popularity and duty are not the same thing. Popularity can rise and fall with headlines. Duty must survive bad weeks, difficult questions, and private pain. If the king is placing greater emphasis on William and Catherine, the message may be that the future monarchy cannot be built only around affection. It must be built around reliability. But reliability, in royal life, often comes at a cost. Queen Camilla's position is one of the most sensitive parts of a story because it sits between personal loyalty and institutional calculation. She remains beside the king, and no serious reading of royal life can ignore the role she has played in Charles's personal journey. Yet the moment people begin discussing the future beyond the current reign, the balance changes. The crown begins looking past companionship and toward continuity. It asks who will carry the institution forward when the next generation takes full command. That does not mean Camilla has been removed from public importance. Buckingham Palace has not confirmed any such dramatic claim. But some observers believe the emotional shock around this reported decree comes from the possibility that influence is being quietly narrowed, not loudly taken away. In royal terms, that can be more powerful than a public announcement. A role may remain visible while its future weight becomes less certain. And viewers may ask a difficult but fair question. Was this about one person, or was it about making sure the monarchy no longer depends on unclear private influence? The same question surrounds Harry and Meghan, though in a very different way. Their departure from working royal life created a gap that has never completely closed in the public imagination. Even after years of distance, their names remain tied to every discussion about reconciliation, return, loyalty, and royal trust. Some viewers still hope for healing. Others believe the crown must protect itself from further disruption. But a reported decree about the monarchy's future would turn that emotional debate into something far more practical. Because the monarchy cannot operate on maybes forever. It cannot keep every door half open without creating confusion about who speaks for the institution. If the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are not part of the working structure, then the palace may eventually have to make that boundary unmistakable. Not as an act of cruelty, but as an act of management. In that sense, the reported decree may be less about punishment and more about definition. Still, definition can wound. For William, that boundary carries personal history. Any move that strengthens his future role while leaving Harry outside official royal function would inevitably be read through the lens of brotherhood. Not just duty, but loss. Not just succession, but separation. And that is why the story draws such strong emotion from viewers. It is not only about titles. It is about the painful moment when a family relationship and an institutional responsibility can no longer be treated as the same thing. That tension has shaped the monarchy before. History shows that the crown often survives by making decisions that feel harsh in private but necessary in public. Abdication, divorce, exile, changing public roles, shifting titles, reduced royal duties, these are not new pressures. What is different now is the speed of public reaction. A palace decision no longer sits quietly inside the walls of Buckingham Palace. It is analyzed within minutes, debated across countries, clipped into videos, and turned into a global argument before the royal household has even finished choosing its words. That is the modern danger King Charles faces. If he waits too long, uncertainty becomes the story. If he moves too quickly, the move itself becomes the scandal. If he protects family feeling, critics may say he is weakening the institution. If he protects the institution, others may say he is abandoning family feeling. There is no painless path, and that may be why the reported decree has attracted so much attention. It appears to sit exactly at the crossroads of duty and emotion. And beneath all of this is a hidden question the palace may not want asked too loudly. Is the monarchy preparing for a future where the Wales family becomes the unquestioned center sooner than the public expected? If so, the implications would reach far beyond William and Catherine. It would affect Camilla's long-term influence, Harry and Meghan's possible return, the workload of other senior royals, and the way the crown presents stability in a changing Britain. That is why Section 2 of the story cannot end with a simple answer. The situation is more layered than that. A reported signature may have opened a wider conversation about power, trust, and the shape of the monarchy after Charles. But the deeper question was not simply who might be affected by the decree. It was who stood to gain from the change, who might quietly resist it, and whether the most important struggle was already unfolding behind palace doors. That possibility is what made the reported decree feel so unsettling. Because once people began asking who might gain, who might lose influence, and who might quietly resist the change, the story stopped being only about royal planning. It became a question of power moving through the palace without fanfare, without banners, and perhaps without every member of the family understanding the full direction until the moment had already arrived. In royal life, influence is rarely announced in bold language. It often appears through patterns. One person is invited into more serious conversations. Another is left out of certain briefings. A senior figure begins appearing at the monarch's side at moments that carry more symbolism than ceremony. A younger royal is asked to take on duties that once belonged to someone else. None of these details may seem decisive on their own, but together they can suggest something important. The institution is preparing itself before the public has been told exactly what is changing. That is why some royal watchers have looked closely at the role of princess and the princess royal, and has never been known as a figure who seeks attention for herself. Her reputation has been built on endurance, punctuality, service, and a kind of blunt loyalty that older royal supporters often admire. She does not need to dominate the balcony to be taken seriously. She does not need constant praise to remain respected. And in a moment when the monarchy may be trying to protect stability, that kind of record becomes powerful. If reports about a future decree are accurate, Anne's importance may not come from title alone. It may come from trust. She represents something the crown often needs in moments of pressure, a senior figure who carries history, discipline, and public credibility without appearing hungry for control. That is a rare position inside any royal household, and it may explain why her name is being discussed in connection with this wider shift. But it also raises a sensitive question. If Anne is becoming more central as a stabilizing presence, does that suggest the palace is less confident in other sources of influence? That is where the story grows more complicated. Camilla's public role beside Charles remains visible, but visibility is not always the same as command. The Queen may attend ceremonies, stand beside the King, and continue to carry the dignity of her position, yet the future of the monarchy belongs increasingly to those who will carry it after this reign. That creates a quiet divide between present loyalty and future authority. And for a figure like Camilla, whose journey into the royal fold required decades of patience, criticism, and gradual public acceptance, any suggestion that influence is being redirected would carry emotional weight. Royal commentators have often noted that Charles values loyalty deeply, perhaps because his own life has been shaped by long waiting, public judgment, and private conflict. But monarchy does not survive on personal loyalty alone. It survives through public confidence. That is the harsh truth beneath this entire discussion. The king may feel affection, gratitude, and personal trust toward those closest to him, but if he is thinking as sovereign, he must ask a colder question. Who best protects the crown after him? That question does not accuse anyone. It simply changes the scale of the decision. For William, the reported decree would not only mean greater prominence. It would mean inheriting a sharper structure. The future king would not be stepping into a vague family arrangement where old tensions could drift endlessly from one generation to another. He would be stepping into a monarchy that Charles may be trying to define before handing it forward. And if that is true, then the king's decision could be seen as both protection and pressure. Protection, because it gives William clearer ground. Pressure, because it gives him fewer excuses. Catherine's position also becomes more strategic in this reading. Her public image is often discussed in emotional terms: calm, graceful, steady, family-focused. But inside a monarchy, image is never only personal. It becomes institutional capital. When the public trusts a royal figure, that trust can help carry the crown through difficult transitions. Some observers believe this is why Catherine's presence beside William has become so significant. She does not merely soften his image. She helps make the next reign feel familiar before it begins. But if that interpretation is correct, then it also means the Waleses are no longer just preparing for the future. They are becoming the future in the public mind while Charles is still on the throne. That is delicate. A monarchy must avoid looking divided between the current sovereign and the next one. It must show continuity, not competition. So if power is being shifted toward William and Catherine, it has to be done carefully, almost invisibly, through duty rather than declaration. And yet a decree, even a reported one, changes the atmosphere. It suggests that the invisible may be becoming formal. The question then becomes whether this is a response to private family tension or to a wider institutional problem. Harry and Meghan remain part of that wider problem, not because of one single moment, but because their royal status has never fully disappeared from public debate. Every rumor of reconciliation, every suggestion of a return, every reported disagreement reopens the same wound. Are they family members with a private connection to the king, or figures whose public association with the monarchy carries risk for the institution? There may be sympathy on both sides of that debate. Families are complicated, and royal families are complicated in public. But from an institutional perspective, uncertainty is costly. If viewers do not know who represents the crown, confusion spreads. If critics can argue that boundaries are unclear, the monarchy appears weak. If supporters feel that duty is being diluted, trust begins to suffer. That is why a future decree, if real, would not simply be about excluding or elevating individuals. It would be about ending ambiguity. Still, ending ambiguity can create new conflict. The moment the crown defines who belongs inside the working structure, it also defines who does not. And every exclusion has emotional consequences. A brother may hear it differently from an advisor. A wife may feel it differently from a courtier. A public figure may interpret it differently from the public watching at home. That is the danger of turning private strain into official architecture. It may bring order, but it can also make wounds impossible to hide. Historically, the monarchy has often survived by converting personal crisis into institutional discipline. The abdication crisis forced the crown to choose duty over romance. The difficult years surrounding divorce and public criticism forced the palace to modernize its communication. The death of Queen Elizabeth II forced the family to prove that continuity could survive the loss of its most trusted symbol. Each time, the monarchy changed because it had no choice. And this reported moment may belong to the same pattern. Not as a sudden explosion, but as a slow correction. That is why the most important part of a story may not be the decree itself. It may be what the decree reveals about the king's state of mind. Charles may be trying to ensure that the next reign does not inherit the same unresolved disputes that have shadowed his own. He may be drawing lines now, so that William does not have to draw them later. He may be trying to protect Catherine from stepping into a future clouded by confusion. He may be ensuring that an steady record becomes a bridge between old duty and new leadership. But even that does not explain the most sensitive part of the story. Because if the monarchy is quietly reorganizing itself around trust, discipline, and future stability, then the next question becomes far more dangerous. Who inside the royal circle recognized the shift first, and who may have realized too late that the balance of power had already changed? The question of who recognized the shift first is what turns this story from speculation into something far more consequential. Because in royal life, the first person to understand where power is moving often has the greatest chance to shape the next chapter. Those who understand too late may find that the doors have not slammed shut, but have quietly stopped opening. According to some royal commentators, the clearest turning point was not the reported signing itself, but the atmosphere that seemed to follow it. When a monarchy begins to reorganize around trust and future stability, the change rarely appears as one dramatic public moment. It appears in the rhythm of decisions. It appears in which royal figures are placed at the front of national occasions, who is trusted to carry difficult public messages, and whose presence reassures the institution when uncertainty begins to gather. That is why the role of the Wales has become so important at this stage. William and Catherine do not need a loud announcement for their position to grow. Their influence increases each time they are treated not simply as senior members of the family, but as the natural point of gravity for the next reign. If the reported decree is accurate, then the real escalation may be that this future role is no longer being left to assumption. It may be moving into deliberate planning. And deliberate planning changes everything. For the Prince of Wales, the consequence is not only more authority. It is the beginning of a different kind of judgment. Once the public starts seeing him as the practical center of the monarchy's future, every action becomes a preview. Every public speech becomes more than a speech. Every decision about duty, family, travel, charity, and representation becomes part of the question people will ask about the next king. Is he ready? Is he steady? Is he different enough from the past, but still loyal enough to the institution he will inherit? Catherine faces a quieter but equally serious pressure. Her strength has often been her ability to appear composed without appearing distant, warm without appearing informal, and modern without seeming careless with tradition. But if the palace is indeed placing greater strategic confidence in the Wales household, then her role becomes more demanding. She is no longer just a symbol of support beside William. She becomes part of the monarchy's emotional architecture, the figure many viewers look to when they ask whether the crown still has a future that feels human, dignified, and stable. That may be why royal observers have paid such close attention to tone. Not just titles, not just announcements, but tone. The monarchy understands that public confidence is built slowly. It is built through appearances that feel calm, family moments that feel sincere, and service that feels consistent. If the future is being quietly shaped around William and Catherine, then the palace must make that transition feel natural. Too much speed would look like panic. Too much hesitation would look like uncertainty. And that is where the tension around Camilla becomes more delicate. The Queen remains part of the present reign, and any responsible discussion must make clear that Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed the dramatic claims being circulated about her influence being formally reduced. Yet perception can become its own pressure. If the public begins to believe that the monarchy's future is moving around her rather than through her, then her position changes in the public imagination even before anything is officially said. A person can remain visible at the king's side and still find that the future conversation has shifted elsewhere. That is a painful distinction, and it is one the palace would understand very well. Camilla's story has always involved public acceptance, patience, and the long shadow of history. For some viewers, she represents loyalty to Charles through difficult years. For others, she remains a figure they never fully embraced. So any reported future decree that appears to strengthen William or Catherine would inevitably be read through the question of Camilla's place. Was the king protecting the monarchy from uncertainty, or was he creating a new emotional wound inside his own household? That is the kind of question that does not disappear with a palace silence. Princess Anne's position adds another layer because she represents a very different kind of royal power. Anne's authority is not built on glamour or public drama. It is built on a record of service that feels almost old-fashioned in the best possible way. She works, she appears, she supports, and she rarely seems interested in turning herself into the story. In moments of institutional pressure, that kind of steadiness becomes valuable because it offers the public a reminder that the monarchy is not only about personalities. It is also about duty carried out over decades. If reports connecting and to the future structure are accurate, then her significance may be less about replacing anyone and more about anchoring the institution while the next generation moves forward. That would be a clever royal calculation. It places a trusted senior figure near the center while allowing William and Catherine to grow into their future without appearing isolated. But even that strategy carries risk. Because whenever one royal figure is elevated in perception, another may appear diminished. And that is when private tension can begin turning into public meaning. Harry, and Meghan remain the most visible example of how quickly royal boundaries can become global debate. If a future structure leaves them outside active royal function, the consequences are not merely administrative. Their supporters may see it as exclusion. Their critics may see it as long overdue clarity. The palace may see it as necessary discipline. But the public will see something more emotional, a family line being drawn in institutional language. For William, that line is especially difficult. It is one thing for commentators to discuss royal function. It is another for a brother to know that the institution he will inherit may have to define his siblings' place from a distance. Some royal watchers believe this is the hidden emotional burden behind the reported decree. It does not simply prepare William for power. It forces him to accept that the next reign may begin with certain doors already closed. That is why the story now feels more serious than a headline about a signature. The reported decree, if accurate, would not only arrange duties, it would shape expectations. It would tell the public where to look for stability. It would tell advisors where authority is likely to gather. It would tell senior royals that the future is being narrowed around those considered most reliable. And it would tell anyone left outside that personal connection alone may no longer be enough. The strongest turning point, then, may be this. The monarchy appears to be moving from emotional management to institutional definition. For years, the palace could rely on ambiguity. It could avoid saying too much, leave difficult questions open, and trust time to soften public interest. But the modern royal audience does not let questions fade so easily. Viewers notice absence. They study language. They compare roles. They ask why one name appears more often and another less often. The institution can no longer assume that silence will protect it. And once that pressure becomes public, the king's challenge becomes almost impossible. If Charles confirms too much, he risks exposing private wounds. If he confirms too little, he allows speculation to grow. If he moves toward William and Catherine, he may appear to be accelerating the next era. If he protects the present arrangement too carefully, he may leave the next reign carrying unresolved problems. Every path has a cost, and that cost is no longer hidden entirely behind palace walls. This is why Section 4 brings the story to its most critical stage. The issue is no longer simply whether a decree was signed or whether reports have captured the full truth. The larger issue is what the monarchy does when private loyalty, public trust, and future survival begin pulling in different directions. Because the real consequence was not only what may have happened in that moment, it was what that moment revealed about the future. And to understand what it truly means, we have to look at the one question still sitting at the center of everything. The question still sitting at the center of everything is not whether one reported decree could change every royal relationship overnight. It is whether the monarchy has reached the point where clarity now matters more than comfort. Because for generations, the crown has survived not by avoiding pain, but by turning painful moments into structure. And if these reports are accurate, that may be exactly what King Charles is trying to do now. The deeper meaning of this story is not found in the shock of a signature alone. It is found in what the signature would represent. A monarch does not need to explain every private calculation for the public to understand when the direction of travel has changed. Sometimes, the clearest message is not delivered through a speech or a grand announcement. It appears through emphasis. It appears through responsibility. It appears through which royal figures are trusted to carry the future, and which figures are slowly moved away from the machinery of the institution. That is why the story has carried so much weight with royal watchers. It touches the most sensitive truth about monarchy. Family may be emotional, but the crown is structural. A father can love his sons. A husband can remain loyal to his wife. A brother can mourn a fractured relationship. But the sovereign is expected to think beyond affection, beyond grievance, and beyond the immediate pain of any one household. The crown asks a colder question. Who can protect public trust when history moves forward? If Charles has indeed been considering a sharper future order, then the long-term consequence may be that the monarchy is preparing to leave less room for uncertainty. That would mark an important shift. For years, royal ambiguity has allowed the family to survive difficult questions without answering them fully. It allowed painful relationships to remain undefined. It allowed possible reconciliations to hover in the background. It allowed supporters of different royal figures to imagine different futures. But ambiguity also carries danger. It can invite confusion, fuel public arguments, and leave the next generation to inherit battles they did not create. That may be the legacy question at the heart of this moment. Charles knows what it means to inherit a crown shaped by the choices of those before him. He waited longer than any previous heir in British history, and when he finally became king, he did not inherit peace. He inherited grief, transition, family division, public pressure, and the constant comparison between the reign that ended and the reign that had just begun. If he is now trying to define the monarchy's future more firmly, it may be because he understands that William cannot be left with uncertainty as his inheritance. And for William, that matters profoundly. The future king must eventually carry not only the throne, but the consequences of every unresolved royal fracture. If the lines around duty, representation, and trust remain blurred, then his reign could begin under the shadow of arguments that should have been settled before he wore the crown. A clearer structure may feel harsh in the present, but it could be designed to protect the next reign from beginning in confusion. That is not a small calculation. It is a decision about legacy. Catherine's place in that future is equally significant. Her importance is no longer only about popularity or public warmth. It is about what kind of monarchy the public imagines when they think of the years ahead. She represents continuity without noise, modernity without rebellion, and family symbolism without spectacle. If the crown is quietly building its future image around the Wales household, then Catherine becomes part of a wider institutional promise. Not a promise of perfection, but a promise of steadiness. Yet that steadiness also comes with sacrifice. The more the future gathers around William and Catherine, the more other figures may find their influence interpreted differently. Camilla may remain central to Charles personally and visibly important to the present reign, but the long future belongs elsewhere, and may become a symbol of hard-earned trust, not because she seeks power, but because she represents service without drama. Harry and Meghan may remain emotionally tied to the family story, but the institutional question around them becomes much narrower. Can those outside working royal life also remain outside the confusion that surrounds it? That is where the public perception becomes decisive. The monarchy does not only survive inside palaces. It survives in the minds of people watching from living rooms, towns, cities, and countries far beyond Britain. Older royal viewers in particular understand the language of duty. They have watched the institution weather scandal, loss, divorce, criticism, and reinvention. They may not expect the royal family to be flawless, but they do expect it to understand the difference between private feeling and public responsibility. This reported decree matters because it speaks to that expectation. It suggests that the monarchy may be trying to show discipline before the next crisis demands it. It suggests that Charles may be choosing order over emotional delay. It suggests that the crown is no longer willing to let the future remain a collection of unresolved possibilities. And whether people agree with that approach or not, it reveals the scale of pressure now surrounding the House of Windsor. Still, nothing about this story feels simple. A clearer monarchy may be stronger, but it can also look less forgiving. A more disciplined royal structure may reassure supporters, but it can deepen wounds inside the family. A future centered on William and Catherine may provide stability, but it also raises expectations that no human couple can carry lightly. And a king who chooses structure over sentiment may protect the institution while leaving behind personal pain that history will continue to examine. That is why the final meaning of this individual story is not that one person wins and another loses. The meaning is that the monarchy appears to be entering a more serious phase, where symbolism, duty, and succession are being weighed with unusual care. If the reports are accurate, Charles is not simply responding to pressure. He is trying to shape the story before the story shapes the crown. And while this moment may seem to close one royal chapter, it also opens a larger question about what kind of monarchy is now being prepared for the next generation. Was this reported decree simply one isolated development, or another sign that the balance inside the House of Windsor is slowly changing? Because as this question begins to settle, another royal development is already drawing attention, and it may reveal even more about the pressure now surrounding the crown.